There's a repeating pattern throughout history, one that has brought down 3 global superpowers in the past 5 centuries. And right now in 2025, the United States is walking down that very same path, step by step, decision by decision. Almost as if we are following a script that has already been written, one that always ends the same way: collapse. Back in 1590, Spain stood at the top of the world, the richest empire on earth. They controlled half the world's gold and silver. Their army ruled Europe. Their currency was accepted everywhere. Yet within just 80 years, Spain was bankrupt, reduced to a second-rate power that would never truly recover. Then came Britain. In 1914, they ruled the largest empire in human history. The sun never set on British territory. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. But within 40 years, the empire was gone, the currency had fallen apart, and Britain became America's junior partner. And finally, the Soviet Union. In 1991, it was the other global superpower, armed with nuclear weapons, massive influence, satellites around the globe. Yet in less than 1,000 days, it ceased to exist, not from war, but from economic collapse. 3 empires, 3 total implosions, all followed the same sequence. And here is the part that should make every American uneasy. The United States has already passed 5 of the 7 stages. We're not approaching the pattern. We're living in it. This is the story of how empires die, why they always believe this time is different, and why the numbers say otherwise. But before we break down that pattern, we need to understand what imperial collapse really looks like, not in textbooks, but in reality. Because it never begins with an invasion or a battlefield defeat. It starts quietly, with economic exhaustion. An empire stretches itself beyond its ability to sustain. Bases in 150 countries, wars on multiple fronts, promises it can't keep, debts it can't repay. At first, everything looks normal. The currency still works. The army still wins. The government still speaks confidently. But beneath the surface, the foundation is crumbling. Resources are wasted. Productivity shrinks. The brightest minds leave. Then comes acceleration. Allies start hedging. Enemies begin to test limits. Trade partners seek alternatives. The reserve currency starts to erode. And suddenly, the things that made you powerful turn against you. Your currency floods back home. Your global military becomes impossible to maintain. Your promises, once backed by strength, become empty words. That's not theory. That's exactly what happened to Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. They all believed their power was permanent. They all overextended, debased their currency, and refused to face reality until it was too late. So let's trace how this pattern unfolded. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, almost identically. Our story begins with Spain, the blueprint for every empire that came after. In the late 1400s, after Columbus discovered the Americas, Spain rose to become the first true world power. They conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, took control of the richest gold and silver mines ever found, and by 1550, Spanish ships were bringing home 200 tons of silver every year. By 1600, that number had doubled. Spain controlled the world's money supply. Their silver coins, the Spanish real, were accepted everywhere. Spain had the global reserve currency. And that is where the pattern begins. A nation that controls the money of the world and starts believing that makes it untouchable. Stage 1. Military overextension. King Philip II, ruling from 1556 to 1598, had more wealth than any monarch in history, and he spent it all on empire. Spain fought wars on 4 continents at once, against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, against France and Italy in Europe, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England's navy, and in colonies across the Americas and Asia. By 1580, Spain's military commitments were everywhere. Half the empire's revenue went to war, and still it wasn't enough. That's how empires start to crack. Too many battles, not enough strength. Stage 2. Currency debasement. Taxes couldn't cover the cost, so the crown did what failing empires always do. They debased the currency. They began mixing copper into silver coins. First 50%, then 75%. The face value stayed the same, but the real value collapsed. By 1600, silver coins barely had any silver left. Merchants stopped accepting them at full price. Inflation exploded. Spain's money, once the strongest in the world, had turned worthless. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Desperate for cash, Spain borrowed endlessly, from Italian and German bankers, anyone who would lend. Within just 20 years of Philip's reign, Spain declared bankruptcy in 1557, then again in 1560, again in 1575, and again in 1596. 4 bankruptcies in 40 years. Every time they promised reforms, every time they broke them. Debt became a habit, and it destroyed them from within. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. Here's the part most people miss. Spain didn't collapse because it lacked gold. It collapsed because it had too much. When money seems endless, people stop producing. Why grow food when you can buy it? Why build ships when you can import them? Why innovate when you can just spend? The nobility saw real work as beneath them. Factories slowed, farms failed, creativity died. Spain's wealth flowed outward, to France, Italy, and the Netherlands, paying for imported goods. They became a middleman of wealth, not a creator of it. When the silver mines in the Americas began to dry up, the system imploded, the money stopped, the empire followed. Stage 5. Social decay. As the economy broke, society followed. Crime skyrocketed. Streets filled with beggars. The best and brightest left for other nations, England, France, the Netherlands, places that were still building, inventing, and growing. Spain was left with bureaucrats, soldiers, and priests, people who consumed wealth but didn't create it. By 1640, Spain lost Portugal. By 1650, it lost the Netherlands, its richest territory. By 1700, the empire was just a hollow shell, powerful only on paper. From the richest nation on earth to a quiet corner of Europe, in less than a century. That's what imperial collapse looks like. 300 years after Spain's fall, a new empire rose, Britain. By the early 1900s, it was the most powerful nation the world had ever seen. A quarter of the planet's land belonged to it. Over 400 million people lived under its flag. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Every major trade deal was written in pounds. Every central bank held British bonds. London was the financial heart of the world. And just like Spain before them, they believed it would last forever. But the pattern had already begun. Stage 1. Military overextension. By 1900, Britain had military commitments everywhere. India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific, the Caribbean. They had to defend colonies on 6 continents. It was expensive, and when World War I broke out in 1914, they faced a choice. Stay out and preserve their power, or jump in and risk everything to win. They chose war. The cost was enormous, $40 billion, over $1 trillion today. To pay for it, they borrowed heavily, especially from the United States. By the end of the war, Britain owed America billions. The creditor had become the debtor. They'd won the war, but mortgaged the empire. Stage 2. Currency debasement. Before the war, the pound was backed by gold. But by 1920, Britain's gold reserves were half gone, shipped to America to pay for weapons, food, and supplies. Still, they tried to maintain the illusion of strength. In 1925, they went back to the gold standard, at the old pre-war exchange rate. But the pound was overvalued. British exports became too expensive. Factories shut down. Unemployment soared. And to defend the currency, they kept interest rates high, strangling the domestic economy. By 1931, they couldn't hold it anymore. Britain abandoned the gold standard, and the pound lost a quarter of its value overnight. The world's reserve currency had just admitted it couldn't keep its promises. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Britain never truly recovered from the debts of World War I. And then came World War II. Another $120 billion spent, mostly borrowed. By 1945, Britain owed more money to the United States and Canada than its entire annual GDP. The war was won. But the empire was finished. They couldn't defend it, couldn't afford it, couldn't sustain it. Stage 4. Loss of empire. In 1947, Britain gave up India, the crown jewel of its empire, the source of its wealth for 2 centuries. Then came Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. By the 1970s, the empire that once ruled a quarter of the planet had vanished. All that remained were scattered territories and fading prestige. Stage 5. Currency collapse. The pound continued to fall decade after decade. 1940, 1.03, 4.03, 1950, 1.280, 1970, 1.240, 1980, 1.230. Today it hovers near 1.20, 1.30. A regional currency, no longer the world's reserve. Britain tried to maintain the illusion of power, a permanent UN seat, nuclear weapons, a special relationship with America. But everyone knew the truth. They were no longer an empire, just a memory of one. A museum of what once was great. And the pattern continued its march forward. After World War II, another superpower rose, one built not on colonies or commerce, but on ideology and control. The Soviet Union emerged as the global challenger to the United States. They had nuclear weapons, the world's largest standing army, and political influence stretching across Eastern Europe. They put satellites in space and believed they were the future, that communism would bury capitalism. For 45 years, the USSR competed with America in everything: military, technology, space, ideology. But beneath the surface, their empire was already dying. Stage 1. Military overextension. The Soviet Union spent an enormous share of its economy, 15 to 20% of GDP, on the military. That was 3 times what America spent. They tried to match every American move, every alliance, every weapon, every frontier. They propped up regimes in Cuba, Vietnam, Syria, Angola, Ethiopia, North Korea. Anywhere the US had influence, they had to counter. The cost was unbearable. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy couldn't sustain it. They were bleeding resources to maintain global reach, just like Spain and Britain before them. Stage 2. Economic stagnation. By the mid-1970s, the Soviet economy had stopped growing. Oil exports kept them afloat for a while, but everything else was collapsing. Factories produced junk nobody wanted. Farms couldn't feed the population. Innovation died under bureaucracy and control. A country with some of the best farmland on earth began importing grain. Because when people have no incentive to create, they stop trying. Central planning doesn't work, and the USSR was proof. Stage 3. Currency collapse. The ruble was never a real global currency. You couldn't exchange it internationally. Even Soviet citizens didn't trust it. They preferred US dollars when they could get them. The government had to buy foreign goods with gold and oil because nobody wanted rubles. By 1985, oil prices dropped, gold reserves fell, and the Soviet Union was running out of hard money. The empire was broke, but still pretending to be strong. Stage 4. Loss of empire. Then the dominoes started falling. In 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, all broke away within a year. The Soviet sphere collapsed overnight. The government couldn't stop it. There was no money, no will, no unity. The empire that once ruled half of Europe was suddenly surrounded by independence. Stage 5. Complete collapse. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. In just 900 days, the world's second superpower disintegrated. Without a war, without an invasion. The ruble became worthless. The military went unpaid. The government fell apart. A nuclear empire imploded from within, not by foreign enemies but by its own economic failure. The pattern had played out again. Overextension, currency failure, debt, loss of empire, collapse. And once again the world told itself, this time it's different. It never is. And now, here we are. The year 2025. The next empire in the pattern. The United States of America, the richest, most powerful nation the world has ever seen. It controls global finance, global trade, global media, and global culture. Its currency, the US dollar, is the backbone of the modern world. Oil, gold, and debt. Everything is priced in dollars. Its military has bases in over 80 countries, fleets in every ocean, satellites watching every corner of the planet. No one can challenge it directly. But the question is, for how long? Because history's pattern never lies. And right now, the US is following it step by step. Stage 1. Military overextension. The United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. Every year, $900 billion goes to the Pentagon, more than education, healthcare, and infrastructure combined. They maintain 750-plus military bases around the world. They're involved, directly or indirectly, in conflicts in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Like Spain, Britain, and the USSR before them, they believe dominance keeps them safe. But history says otherwise. Overreach drains empires faster than war. Stage 2. Debt explosion. In 1980, U.S. national debt was under $1 trillion. Today, it's over $35 trillion and growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. That's not a typo. Every few months, America borrows an amount larger than the entire GDP of most countries. They call it modern economics. But it's the same thing every collapsing empire said. We can print forever. Spain printed silver. Britain borrowed gold. The Soviets printed rubles. America prints dollars. Different ink, same mistake. Stage 3. Currency debasement. For decades the dollar was backed by gold, but in 1971 the US cut that tie. Since then, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power. Inflation isn't a glitch, it's a policy. They print money to pay for wars, for bailouts, for votes, and every time they do, the middle class pays the price. Wages stagnate, prices rise, the rich get richer because they own the assets that inflate. Everyone else gets poorer because they live on the currency that's dying. Stage 4. Internal decay. Empires don't collapse only from the outside, they rot from within. And right now, America is splitting apart along every fault line imaginable. Political polarization, cultural warfare, social division, mass distrust in media, government, and institutions. In the late stages of every empire, citizens stop believing in the system and start believing only in survival. When truth becomes tribal and debt becomes infinite, collapse becomes inevitable. Stage 5. The turning point. Every empire reaches a point when the rest of the world stops believing in its money and in its promise. For America, that moment is approaching. Countries are already trading outside the dollar. China, Russia, India, Brazil. Foreign central banks are dumping US debt. And America's own citizens are buying gold, Bitcoin, and land. Anything but dollars. The empire doesn't vanish overnight. It fades, slowly, then suddenly. History doesn't repeat word for word, but it rhymes perfectly. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, and now, the United States. The names change, the currency changes, but the pattern never does. The final question. Every empire believes it's different. Every empire believes it can outsmart history. But history doesn't negotiate, it only records. So, the only question left is, will America learn from the pattern, or complete it? The pattern has spoken, and it never lies.